Hello and welcome to Gun Safety 101. My name is John Roberts. You may be here for a specific reason, a curiosity reason. Chances are you just purchased a gun and don't know how to use it. Good choice to come here. You inherited a gun from your grandfather that you've never used and you want to start using it and you need to learn how to use it. Good place to show up here. Or you could be just like me and really curious about what other people have to say about guns. Either way, anyway, welcome. Gun Safety 101. There are 4 cardinal rules to gun handling. The first one is all guns are always loaded and we always pretend they are. No matter what we're doing with them, we consider them fully loaded. Second rule of gun safety is never point the muzzle at anything you do not want to destroy. For you new people, muzzle is the end of the gun where the bullet comes out. Rule number 3. Never place your finger on the trigger until you intend to fire the gun. That is having your sights on target, everything ready to go. You pull the trigger and you're off. This is the condition of your trigger finger 98% or possibly more of the time that you have a gun in your hand. Actually, pulling the trigger on a gun is a very brief moment in time. You pull the trigger, your finger comes off the trigger. So 98 to 99% of the time, this is the condition of your trigger finger. This is the biggest gun safety that we all possess, is our trigger finger. So do not break rule number 3, or 1, or 2 for that matter. And rule number 4 is know what your target is. And what's beyond your target, what's to the left of your target, what's to the right of your target, anything in front of your target. You must positively identify a target and understand that physics are at play when you pull the trigger on a gun and the bullet will land somewhere. And you're responsible for the location of that bullet for every round you fire. So make sure that you know what your target is, know what's behind your target and on either side of it, so that if you do miss your target, your bullet will fall harmlessly, hopefully harmlessly, to the ground. Okay, so just because you know that does not mean that you are now safe with handguns. You need to understand how they operate, why they operate. You need to understand ammunition. You need to understand the functionality. You also need to learn how to clean them in a safe and very, safe. It's all about gun safety. So I'm going to talk about revolvers here for just a little bit. I'm going to give you the basics of a revolver. I'm going to show you how to load the revolvers, how to manipulate each different type of revolver. There's 3 different types of platforms that revolvers come in, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But for now, let's just talk simply about revolvers. A revolver is a handgun that has a rotating cylinder containing firing chambers. The actions of the trigger or hammer will line up a chamber with the barrel and the firing pin. The basic components of a revolver, one of them is the frame, the backbone to which all other parts are attached. The grips, they could be composed of rubber, wood, plastic, and are attached to the backside of the gun frame. Trigger guard will protect the trigger from unintentional firing. If you have a gun or find a gun that does not have a trigger guard, it's not a very safe handgun. The rear sight is a notch. It could be a V, it could be dots, and it's used when aiming the gun in conjunction with the front sight. It has a back strap. Some of the back straps can be exposed, as this gun, it has an exposed back strap. Some of them are simply covered by the grips like this, but they all have one, otherwise the gun would just fall apart. You don't want that to happen. Second thing you have is a barrel, which is a metal tube through which the bullet passes. The bore is the inside of the barrel. Do not get too technical about bores or anything to that nature. Just understand that the barrel does have the gun does have a bore, and it's just a thing. Now, they all have rifling. There's traditional rifling, which consists of lands and grooves, and there's polygonal rifling, which consists of hills and valleys. It is important to know what type of rifling you have in your gun, for the most part for cleaning purposes, but also traditional rifling will leave etches on the brass or on the copper or whatever type of round you're shooting. That's how forensics people find out whose gun it came out of, where polygonal leaves no marks on the bullets after they've been fired. Once again, it has a muzzle, front end of the gun that the bullet exits. Do not point that at anything you do not want to destroy, which is back to rule number 2. It has an action, it has a group of parts inside. You don't see too many of them moving. You see the hammer, you see the trigger, you see the cylinder, but there's other stuff going on inside the frame that you don't see, which you really don't need to get too involved with unless you're trying to take it down for cleaning purposes, and I would hesitate to do something like that. Again, it has a trigger. It's used to either cock and release the hammer or just simply release the hammer. It has a hammer. They all have hammer. Well, they don't all have hammers, excuse me. This one has a hammer, and it's used for cocking and firing the gun. They all have cylinders of some sort, whether they roll out of the frame or they stay inside the frame, and we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Cylinder release latch, if it has a rollout cylinder, is going to be typically on the left side of the frame. It has chambers are located inside the cylinder. I have guns up here that hold 5, 6, and 10 rounds each. The 10 round is a 22 caliber revolver. The ejector on the guns is typically going to be on the left hand side. It's connected to the cylinder as it rolls out. To activate the ejector on this, pop the cylinder out, and as I mentioned, under normal circumstances these would not just simply fall out like they're doing now. You would have to use the ejector rod and it would push them out. You have to hit them a couple of times to get them out of there possibly. Close the cylinder, the gun's unloaded. So the revolvers have actions, or types, however you want to say it. There's single action only, there's double action only, and then there's double singles. We're going to pick up a single action only gun. These guns have all been safety checked, but we will safety check them as we go through them. This gun is accessed, or I should say the cylinder is accessed from the right side of the frame through a thing called the loading gate. The cylinder on this gun does not roll out. Single action revolvers are accessed through the loading gate on the right side of the frame. The rounds are placed in there one at a time. Gravity is your friend when you're loading a revolver and unloading a revolver. They're placed in there, as I said, one at a time. It takes a little bit of time. These guns are slow to load. Close the loading gate, rotate the cylinder so it locks in, and the gun's ready to fire. Now, if this gun had been fired, the brass would be hard to get out, but there is an ejector up here. You line it up with that and you push it, and it pushes the brass out of the gun. Now, when this gun is in this condition with the hammer forward, I can do whatever I want to this trigger and it will not fire the gun. This trigger cannot ever cock the hammer. It has no mechanism built into it to do that. To fire this gun, I have to physically cock the hammer with my thumb. The trigger moves back into the trigger guard and then I can fire the gun. To fire in the consecutive shots after that, I have to continuously cock the hammer with my thumb. Again, because this trigger does one single thing. It simply releases the hammer. It can never cock the hammer. That is a single action only gun. Double action only guns, double singles, forgive me on that one. You'll see that this has a cylinder release latch here. There's different types of cylinder release latches. Some push forward, some pull back, some push into the frame of the gun. But it releases the cylinder and allows it to roll out for unloading and loading. And this is the ejector on this particular gun. It's right in the middle of the cylinder, and you lock the cylinder in, you rotate it so it clicks in. Now this gun is a double single action, so I can shoot this gun double action by pulling the trigger. Let me make sure that this gun was in fact safety checked. It was. I can pull the trigger by cocking the hammer with my finger and releasing the hammer with my finger as well. So this trigger is doing two things. It's cocking and releasing the hammer. Or I can put it into single action mode and pull the trigger with a lot less pressure. From here to there it takes about 12 pounds of physical pressure, but from here to here it takes probably under 2 pounds of physical pressure. These guns are shot much faster in double action mode as opposed to cocking it with your thumb and shooting it. Now, this is a double action only gun. The cylinder release latch is a push into the frame on this one. It's chambered in 357. It is extremely light. It has no hammer that we can physically access. So the trigger has to always do two things on this gun. It has to cock the internal hammer and release it. And on this particular revolver, I believe the trigger weight on this is 9.5 pounds. The fact that these triggers are so heavy is part of the safety mechanisms of revolvers. There is a couple of revolvers that do have safeties, and some of them have backstrap safeties. I do not have any of those, and they're not that common anyways, but some of them have locks on the side for safeties. But certainly for concealed carry, if you were talking about that, if you were looking into that, this is the type of gun that I would carry either in my pocket or on my ankle or in a purse. It can be shot from a purse because there's nothing to snag on the hammer. This is a double action only. So we've looked at a single action, we've looked at a double single action, we've looked at a single action. We're going to load, well, you saw how I loaded this one at a time, and that's how it unloads as well. Gravity is your friend. These are just going to fall out because they haven't expanded. I'm going to put those right back in here in just a minute. But to load a double action, you would push the button, the cylinder release latch, Grab 5 or 6 rounds, depending on the gun you have. You're going to push 2 fingers through the frame and your thumb. You're going to manipulate the cylinder with your thumb. And consider this gun a clock, with the top of the gun being at 12 o'clock. It is still at 12 o'clock, so the clock is now laying down. You're going to want to try to load a 9 o'clock chamber. As far away from the frame as you can get it. One at a time, they go in while you're rotating the cylinder with your thumb. Lock it, twist it, it's loaded. Now to unload this gun, gravity is once again your friend. These are dummy rounds and they're just going to fall out, but if this had been fired, you would have to push on the ejector rod to get them out of the chambers. That is the first way to load a revolver, is 1 round at a time. Second way is with a speed strip, which this particular one holds 6. Now there are different speed strips. The smaller the speed strip, the better. This one holds 6. I have a 5-shot revolver, but I'm going to put the 6th one in just for grins. We're going to eject the cylinder or roll it out. 2 rounds at a time in there. We're going to put our thumb against the back of it and we're going to peel them off. Again, 2 rounds, thumb, peel. Last round on that, gun's loaded. A little bit faster than 1 at a time, of course. Dump those out. Now I'm going to pick up a speed loader. Now, when it comes to guns, accessory, ammunition, anything really in the gun world, if you pay a lot more for it, it's probably a better product. You can purchase aluminum and plastic speed loaders for $15 to $20 for 2 of them with a little nylon pouch. Or you could buy one like this. It's made out of titanium, and this single speed loader costs $25. So chances are if you're spending more, you're getting better. For these, now we have to defeat the rotation of the cylinder. Now we have to use our fingers and our thumb to keep the cylinder from spinning. Remember, gravity is your friend. Insert it, twist it, shake it, close it, and the gun's loaded. This particular speed loader locks in and loads to the left. Some of the other ones are reversed. You'll have to get to know your speed loader. But prior to putting one of these in my pocket, I will always give it a tip test to ensure that they're locked in. Otherwise, I do that and I end up with a pocket full of loose rounds. The 4th way, not uncommon, but this is more of a competition type thing. It's very, 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 very fast. The gun has to be set up for it. It's called a moon clip. All 5 or 6 rounds, depending on the type of gun you have, are clipped into the moon clip. They are inserted into the chamber all at one time. And the chamber's closed, the gun's fired, and then the whole moon clip is dumped out at one time. Pretty fast. I've seen people do that, and you can barely see their hands move. So remember, when you're loading one of these, gravity is your friend. You tip the gun sideways. Remember, rule number 2 is do not point the muzzle at anybody you do not, or anything you do not want to destroy. So if you've got a gun in your hand, sometimes you actually have to twist your body to make sure that the muzzle is pointed in a safe direction. So, because when you have a gun in your hand, the muzzle belongs to you. There's nothing that anybody else can do to that gun. You're totally in charge of it. So now, when a double or a single action gun, or a double single, is cocked, the only way to uncock this gun is to physically pull the trigger. This can be a dangerous thing to do if you do not do it correctly. Point the gun in a very safe direction. Preferably, if you're on range, walk down to the dirt mound or the backstop if you can. If you can't, you have to do this with extreme caution to start with. I hold the revolver in my left hand. I'm going to secure the hammer with my thumb. My finger is out of the trigger guard when I do that. I'm going to press the trigger. I'm going to let the hammer go forward just a hair, and I'm going to get my finger out of the trigger guard and let the hammer go forward with control. If you do not get your finger off the trigger and the hammer slips out of your hand or from underneath the thumb, it could hit that round with enough energy to discharge the gun. The safeties on revolvers are connected to the triggers. In this particular case, this firearm does not have a firing pin on the hammer, so it has a safety called a transfer bar, which when the safety is in play, the safety is dropped out of the way to create a gap between the hammer and the firing pin. Your finger's off the trigger while you're doing that, and the safety has an opportunity to do its job. This is called the transfer bar, and if I kept my finger on the trigger, the transfer bar would stay up there, the hammer would hit it, the transfer bar would hit the firing pin, the gun would go bang. With this type of gun that has a firing pin on the hammer itself, the safety actually comes up to intercept the hammer because it has a firing pin on it, and I'm going to do this improperly by leaving my finger on the trigger, and watch what happens to the hammer when I take my finger off the trigger. It moves backwards because the safety came up to intercept and keep the hammer from touching the round. And it would do that extremely fast when you get your finger off the trigger. So always, 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 anytime you have to decock a revolver, you must always make sure that you're pointing in a nice, safe direction, so that if you do slip or make a mistake, and it does discharge, it's not going to hurt anybody or anything. Now, you need to practice this stuff at home with an unloaded gun over and over and over again if you're going to be carrying and or shooting a revolver. Sometimes they malfunction. It's rare that a revolver malfunctions. They have very few moving parts, but they can in fact malfunction. Those malfunctions could be bad ammunition, a broken gun, a couple of other things, but they're pretty simple instruments. They don't have that many moving parts. So if your gun does fail to fire on the range, you should give it a second or two to see if it's just going to go bang after a couple seconds. It's called a hang fire. They're extremely rare, and we'll get to talking about that more later, but hang fires are a thing, but extremely rare. 1 out of 10 million. I don't know what the stats are on it, but they are incredibly rare. Usually what happens is a hang fire becomes a misfire. So if you do pull the trigger on a revolver and it just simply goes click, the only thing you have to do with the revolver is just simply pull the trigger again, because the cylinder will rotate into another position, put another round in front of the hammer and the firing pin. So don't panic, just pull the trigger again. If this happens 2 times in a row or 3 times in a row, there's a good chance that your gun is broken and you need to get it fixed. American-made ammunition, sure, you could have a misfire, you could have a squib load, which is a less than normal pressure round, but they're rare. They're extremely rare with American-made ammunition. So don't buy overseas ammunition. They can malfunction a whole lot more than American ammunition will. So you can also look at the back of your round. The firing pin will leave a dent in the primer if it struck it. If it struck it hard enough, you'll see a big dent in it. If it didn't, it'll just have a slight indentation. So if it's got a nice dent in it and the round didn't fire, there's a possibility that you have a bad round. You can put those back into the gun, cycle them through the gun again, and see if they go bang the second time. More commonly than not, they do. Now, if your gun won't extract, in other words, get the empty cases out of the gun, chances are you've got dirty ammunition or a dirty gun. And if you have a dirty gun, bad on you. You should clean your gun on a regular basis. The brass does expand when it's fired, and we'll bring this up again later, but this is a 40 caliber piece of brass that was fired out of a 45 caliber gun, which means that the chamber it was in was 5/100 of an inch bigger than the caliber of the piece of brass. And when it expanded to fill the entire 45 caliber chamber, and it shredded itself in the process. Somebody made a big mistake. It did not hurt anybody or the gun, but you can see that the brass itself is kind of shredded when it expanded inside the chamber. So chances are you will have to use the ejector every time, whether your gun is clean or whether your gun is dirty, because the brass expands and fills the entire chamber. Again, from a self-defense standpoint, if you're choosing to take a self-defense class somewhere or a concealed carry class in your state, unless you're constitutional carry, if your revolver malfunctions, just pull the trigger again and again. And if it stops firing and you have no live rounds coming out of it, and hopefully you've got a good arm and you can throw it at the assailant and then run. So that's Revolvers 101. That's how they work. We're going to talk about cleaning them at another section, and we're going to move into looking at pistols and how they operate and how they function. So give me a moment.